Christmas night, my grandfather slid 3 white envelopes across the table and the silverware froze midair. My parents laughed sharp plastic laughter that scraped the edges of the room. They thought it was another one of his old man games, something to mock on the drive home. I didn't laugh. I just watched his eyes dim, like he already knew what was coming. The next morning the bank called. My deposit had cleared. But what they didn't know was that one call would rip my family apart. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt that strange sinking moment when family stops feeling like family. Because what happened next didn't unfold in a single day, it built slowly, quietly, until one decision exposed everything we'd been pretending not to see. And trust me, you'll want to hear the whole story. I grew up in a house where everything looked perfect and nothing felt real. My mom curated our lives like a magazine, spread fresh flowers on the counter, matching outfits for every holiday photo, smiles practiced in the hallway mirror before guests arrived. My dad wasn't any better. He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the oven door more often than he looked me in the eye. I learned early appearances came first, people somewhere after. One of my earliest memories is a dinner when I was 7. The roasted chicken smelled incredible, the kind that made your stomach twist with hunger. When my mom asked who wanted the drumstick, I raised my hand without thinking. She barely glanced my way before placing it on my brother's plate. He didn't even notice, too busy crushing peas into the tablecloth. I swallowed the disappointment like it was part of the meal. Back then, I didn't understand why it stung. I just knew it did. Years later, I won a small art contest at school. Nothing big, a ribbon, a cheap frame. I remember clutching it in the car, convinced that maybe this time they'd see me. But at home, my mom set it on a shelf behind a decorative candle and said, "Don't brag, sweetheart. It's tacky." At dinner, she mentioned it like a joke. My dad nodded once and pivoted immediately to my brother's soccer score. I forced a smile. Inside, something tightened I couldn't name yet. By the time I hit high school, I'd learned the pattern. If it didn't look good on paper or online, it didn't matter. I worked part-time at a grocery store, early mornings, late nights, cold fingers scanning barcodes. I sent part of my paycheck home thinking it helped with bills. I found out months later it went toward a weekend getaway they posted on Instagram with the caption, "Grateful for rest." That one hurt in a way that stuck deep and quiet. Holiday seasons only highlighted the gap. Christmas gifts were always uneven. My brother got the expensive electronics, personalized accessories, things with meaning. I got candles, scratchy sweaters, or gift cards still stuck to their activation stickers. Every year I told myself it wasn't intentional. Every year I believed it less. The only place I ever felt seen was my grandfather's house. Thomas Reed lived in a lakeside town that smelled like pine and wood smoke. His house creaked in familiar ways, like it made room for me. He didn't speak much, but when he looked at you, he really looked. When I was 12, he let me help sand a maple table in his workshop. Sunlight cut through the dust-filled air as he handed me a sanding block and said, "Steady hands, steady mind." No one had ever called me steady before. I didn't understand how much I needed that. He came to one of my school art shows, just one, but he stood in front of my crooked watercolor like it was priceless. "You see the world differently," he told me. "That's not a flaw." That night, driving home with him, I stared at the passing headlights and wondered why his words felt warmer than anything I heard at my own dinner table. Those early moments became the quiet foundation of who I grew into, the parts of me my parents never noticed. But he always did. By the time I graduated high school, the divide between my parents and me felt like a long hallway with no doors. I chose interior design for college, something that made sense to me, shaping spaces into places people could breathe inside. My parents hated it instantly. My dad told people I was experimenting creatively, which was his polite way of saying he didn't approve. My mom insisted I was wasting potential by not networking with the right people. And by network, she always meant marrying rich or flattering clients until they wrote checks. But my grandfather never asked me to justify my choices. When I turned 16, he gave me a tiny envelope with $20 and a note. "For your first project." I didn't understand how a single line could mean so much, but years later, in lonely apartments and late-night design deadlines, that note became my anchor. I kept it in a wooden box with other small pieces of my life ticket stubs, sketches, things no one else cared about. After college, I moved to Seattle. I rented a one-bedroom apartment in a building where the elevator groaned and the hallway lights flickered if you walked too fast. I styled it with thrift store finds and scraps of lumber I refinished myself. Clients came slowly, a coffee shop needing a new layout, a friend of a friend wanting a home office refresh. I didn't have a team, an intern, or an assistant. Just me, my laptop, and the lessons my grandfather carved into me years earlier. My parents called my setup humbling, the way some people call things quaint when they really mean embarrassing. They paraded my brother's achievements online, his job, his new condo, his shiny engagement, while referring to my life as still finding direction. Every holiday dinner felt more like a performance, my parents playing lead roles in a show I never auditioned for. Still, I tried. I kept showing up. I brought thoughtful gifts. I acted grateful, even when the comments stung. I kept waiting for a moment when they'd look at me the way my grandfather did, like I was enough, without having to pretend. Then came last year's Thanksgiving. It was the first time I noticed my grandfather watching my parents with something colder than disappointment. They were live streaming part of dinner, showing off the meal he'd cooked, the table he'd set, the house he'd maintained alone. The camera hovered over his shoulder while he carved the turkey, and he didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened and his eyes shifted to me for a split second. I didn't know what that look meant then, but it stayed with me. A week later, he sent out the Christmas dinner invitations. Thick cream cards, his handwriting neat and certain. My parents treated it like a golden ticket. I treated it like a chance to breathe again. Driving to his house that Christmas felt like stepping through a familiar doorway at the end of a long corridor. The further I got from Seattle, the easier it was to inhale. Snow lined the road as if guiding me toward something I couldn't name yet. I didn't realize those quiet childhood memories, those small wounds, and those long drives would all collide on a single night. A night that would change everything. By the time Christmas Day actually arrived, my nerves were stretched thin. I drove to my grandfather's town alone, rain streaking across the windshield in long, trembling lines. Seattle behind me felt heavy. The closer I got to the lake, the lighter the air became, as if the trees themselves were exhaling for me. I pulled into his driveway almost an hour early. His porch light was already on, glowing a soft amber through the drizzle. He opened the door before I knocked, like he'd been standing there waiting. His smile was small but warm, real, the kind that didn't need an audience. "Good timing," he said. "The kitchen's a mess." It wasn't. It never was. But I followed him in anyway. Inside the house smelled like roasted duck and rosemary. The windows fogged slightly from the heat, and the wooden floors creaked under our steps. He moved slower than usual, subtle but noticeable. And when he leaned down to check the oven, a cough slipped out of him, sharp and dry. He steadied himself on the counter. "You sure you're okay?" I asked. "Cold weather," he muttered, brushing it off, but the look in his eyes said something else. Something tired. We set the table together, a quiet rhythm we'd fallen into over the years. He let me place the crystal glasses, adjust the candles, polish the silverware. Simple tasks, but ones that made me feel like I belonged in that house. Behind us, the old piano sat by the window, slightly out of tune, but still holding the echoes of afternoons from my childhood. "They're late," he said eventually. "They're always late," I replied. Right on cue, the front door opened. A blast of cold air and perfume filled the hallway. My mother appeared first, wrapped in a white faux fur coat, her phone held high as she filmed her entrance. "Christmas with family," she said into the camera before lowering it and dropping the smile instantly. My father followed behind, adjusting his designer coat, wearing a grin that never reached his eyes. "Dad," he said, shaking my grandfather's hand a little too firmly. "We're blessed, aren't we?" That was his line for everything blessed. Used it like a shield. Dinner began politely enough. Vanessa complimented the centerpiece, the lighting, the tablecloth, like she was reviewing a hotel. Charles talked loudly about the market, the investors he was meeting, his big quarter ahead. None of it felt like conversation. All of it felt like posing. Then my grandfather placed 3 white envelopes on the table. The room stilled. He slid one to each of us. "A little Christmas gift," he said quietly. "Just a token." Vanessa laughed first, a high-practiced sound. "Oh, Dad, are we doing the pretend checks again? You're adorable." Charles smirked. "What is it this time?" "Monopoly money. A lesson on humility." Their laughter scraped through the room like metal on concrete. My grandfather didn't flinch, but something in his expression dimmed, a barely there shift, and when his gaze flicked briefly toward their envelopes, not mine, I felt my pulse skip. I didn't open mine. I didn't joke. I just said, "Thank you. I'll open it later." My mother rolled her eyes. "Harper, don't be dramatic. It's just a joke." My father added, "She's always so serious." Their attention shifted, but my grandfather's didn't. He looked at me with something heavy, approval and disappointment at the same time. After dinner, as we gathered our things, my parents drifted toward the door, too absorbed in their phones to notice much else. I hugged my grandfather goodbye. But he didn't let go. He held on for several seconds longer than usual, his breath warm near my ear. "Keep it safe," he whispered. Then he released me, and the porch light flickered overhead. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. The drive back to Seattle that night was painfully quiet. Rain hammered the windshield, and the wipers dragged like they were exhausted too. My parents insisted I ride with them, which I regretted before the car even pulled out of the driveway. Vanessa twisted around in her seat, staring at the envelope in my lap like it offended her. "You're really keeping that?" she asked. "Harper, he does this every year. It's just his little act." Charles snorted. He just wants to see who still bows to him. It makes him feel important. I kept my eyes on the window where the streetlights smeared into long streaks of gold. Or maybe I said quietly, he just wants respect. They didn't respond. They didn't need to. Their offended silence said enough. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the air felt colder than outside. I tossed my coat onto a chair, set the envelope on my desk, and stood there staring at it. My hands tingled with nerves I couldn't shake. Eventually, I opened my wooden keepsake box, the one holding pieces of my life no one else valued. Right on top was the note my grandfather gave me at 16. For your first project. The ink had faded slightly, but the steadiness of his handwriting never changed. I took a breath, returned to the envelope, and slid my finger under the flap. A real check. $250,000. No jokes, no pranks, no lesson in humility. My throat tightened. I sent a voice memo to Mia. It's real, I whispered. I don't know what to think. She replied instantly. If he meant it, cash it. If he didn't, your bank app will humble you. So I deposited it. Not because I wanted the money, but because every instinct in me said my grandfather wasn't playing games. Hours later, while sketching a design draft, my phone rang. Unknown number. Good afternoon, Miss Reed. I'm calling about your recent deposit. It has cleared. I nearly dropped my pencil. Cleared already. Yes, ma'am, the banker said. Mr. Reed has been shifting large assets lately. You must be important to him. Important. I'd never heard anyone attach that word to me before. Minutes after I hung up, my phone buzzed again. My mother. Her voice came out sharp, breathy. Harper, did you talk to your grandfather today? No, I said. Well, the bank just told us our checks were stopped. Her tone cracked. Stopped. And they said yours went through. I stayed silent. Did you tell him something? Did you ask for something? She demanded. No. I deposited it. That's all. Then why would he stop ours a beat? Then softer, uglier. Do you have any idea what people will think if they find out he cut us off? Not what did we do wrong. Not is he okay? Just what will people think? An hour later, Charles called. His voice was colder than the rain outside. Your mother is upset. You could have given us a heads up. It was a gift, I said. Isn't that what you do with gifts? Don't get smart with me, he snapped. He's old. He doesn't know what he's doing. Old. They dismissed the man who built their entire lifestyle in one breath. That night, as I sat on the floor staring at the check confirmation, my phone rang again. My grandfather. His voice was calm, steady. Did they call you yet? Yes. He exhaled quietly. Good. Then I didn't stop their checks. They stopped themselves the moment they laughed. He didn't explain further. And I didn't ask. The next morning, the family group chat exploded. Screenshots, accusations, half-threats, long messages typed through tears or anger or both. Vanessa demanded answers. Charles threatened to handle it legally. Meanwhile, my grandfather stayed silent. Until 2 days later, when a cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. Dinner, Saturday, 7 p.m. No explanation. That afternoon, Ethan Cole, my grandfather's lawyer, called me. His voice was careful. Harper, he updated some documents last week. He wants you there Saturday. Just be prepared. Prepared for what? Later that night, digging through old emails for a client invoice, I stumbled on a will from years ago. Almost everything properties, investments, accounts had been meant for my parents. I was the afterthought. Somewhere along the line, something shifted. And Saturday night, I was about to find out why. Snow covered my grandfather's walkway in a thin, glassy sheet the night of the second dinner. The air was sharp enough to sting my lungs. His house glowed the same warm gold through the windows, but the warmth felt staged, like the lights were doing a job the room couldn't. Inside, the dining table was already set. 3 place settings. Not 4. Not festive. Just deliberate. Vanessa sat nearest the window, hands clenched in her lap, lipstick darker than usual. Charles stood behind his chair, tapping one foot, checking his watch every few seconds. Neither of them looked at me when I came in. Let's get this over with, Charles muttered. Before I could speak, footsteps echoed down the hallway, measured, steady, not rushed. Thomas entered the room carrying a stack of folders pressed flat against his chest. He didn't greet us. He simply set the folders on the table and looked at each of us, like he was counting something only he understood. I won't take much of your time, he said. Vanessa forced a smile. Dad, if this is about the checks. He raised a hand. She stopped instantly. These, he said, sliding a folder to each of us, are bank statements printed this morning. Charles grabbed his first, flipping the pages faster than he could process them. His face drained. You transferred everything he said. You really did it. Thomas nodded once. No drama, no apology. Vanessa's voice cracked. Dad, why? Why would you do this? He looked at her calm and unblinking. Because when I handed you those envelopes, you didn't just laugh at a gift. You laughed at me. She froze. He continued, his voice low but razor sharp. Last year, you live-streamed my Thanksgiving table without asking. The year before that, you mocked my Christmas envelopes until you saw there were gift cards inside. You've treated generosity like a performance. respect like an inconvenience. Charles stepped forward. You're twisting things. We've supported you, too. Thomas's eyes hardened. You've taken my money and called it independence. He turned to Ethan's email printed inside the folder. And you planned what you'd do with my assets once I died. Charles stiffened. That was private. Not when it's about me, Thomas said. Then he turned to me. Everything in me went still. You, he said softly, did not laugh. You listened. He slid a separate folder toward me, thinner but heavier somehow. I've transferred controlling interest of the Reed Trust to you. Under one condition, you keep this house for at least 5 years and you continue the scholarship fund your grandmother started. Vanessa let out a small broken noise. So she gets rewarded for doing nothing. Thomas's voice dropped. Cold, decisive. You built an image. She built respect. Silence swallowed the room. Then he said the words that ended everything. That night, I wasn't testing greed, I was testing gratitude. He paused, letting the weight settle. Now I know who's real. Vanessa covered her mouth to stop a sob. Charles looked away, jaw trembling with anger he couldn't hide. Thomas stepped back from the table. Dinner's in the oven. You're welcome to stay. If you can sit here without pretending. He didn't look at them again. He didn't need to. Something had been cut clean at what final irreversible. And all any of us could do was sit in the silence he left behind. Vanessa broke first. She stood so fast her chair scraped across the floor like metal on bone. Her face was blotchy, her mascara smudged at the corners. Enjoy this, she whispered, voice shaking. Enjoy being the favorite for once. She grabbed her purse and walked out without looking back. Charles followed, slower shoulders, tight chin tucked like he was swallowing humiliation. He didn't slam the door. He just closed it quietly, a quiet that felt more painful than shouting. Then it was only me and my grandfather. He walked back to the table and lowered himself into the chair across from mine. His hands rested over each other, steady, firm, as if the confrontation hadn't drained him at all. You didn't cash that check for the money, he said. He wasn't asking. No? I answered. I cashed it because pretending it was a joke felt wrong. He nodded once, almost proud. Then he pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket, then unsealed and slid it toward me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No check, no numbers. Just his handwriting. Money changes hands every day. Respect. Only once. A breath caught in my throat. I turned the page over. On the back he'd written, "Don't let them teach you that love is a performance." The words hit harder than any number he could have given me. Harder than all the shouting and silence my parents had thrown my way over the years. Because it wasn't about money. It never had been. He was giving me something they would never earn again. His name, his trust, his final say in what our family would become. I realized then the check wasn't the weapon. I was. My parents thought losing his money was the punishment. They didn't understand the real consequence, the one they'd never see coming. They'd spent years crafting an image. Now I controlled the legacy behind it. And whether they liked it or not, the next chapter of the Reed family would be written by me. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. Stories like this don't end in a single night, they ripple. They reshape people, and they force truths out of the shadows. What happened after that dinner changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty, inheritance, and what it means to finally take your place in a family that never expected you to. So stay with me. This story isn't over, not even close.